Castaways. When you read the title and you look at the image on the box, the theme seems pretty obvious. In this semi-cooperative game, players play the role of castaways that are stranded on a deserted island. They need to survive and work together to survive, and they need to wait for an opportunity to leave the island. An opportunity will present itself at the end of the game, but at that point the players as a team need to be able to meet certain requirements to be able to leave the island. If they do not meet those requirements, they will lose the game, but if they do meet the requirements and their characters all leave the island, still only one player will be the winner. And yes, this is a semi-cooperative adventure, not my favorite form of gaming. I prefer competitive or fully cooperative. Let me tell you a little bit about the game and how it works. The design has a lot of parts to it, a lot of cogs and wheels that need to work together to make the design work, so it may take me a little bit to explain the game. Please bear with me. At the end of the explanation, I will give you my opinion about Castaways. Each character in the game is represented by a card such as this one. Each character has a special ability. The abilities vary from character to character, and they can be used during gameplay based on when the ability of the character applies. Each character also has an energy track that you use to record the level of energy that the character has. As the character performs actions or suffers exposure or other game effects, the energy of the character decreases, and then there are a way of increasing energy. There may also be game effects that inflict injuries on players. One common way of receiving injuries is if you have 0 energy points and you need to spend points, then you receive injuries, which are represented by white cubes, and they're placed on top of your track. And white cubes representing injuries decrease temporarily the maximum amount of energy points that you can have, because you cannot put your energy marker back onto spots on the track that have cubes on them. At the end of each turn, you also roll a die for each injury that you have, and if you roll a 1, you receive a trauma. An injury turns into a trauma, which is represented by a black cube. There are also other game effects that inflict traumas on players. If you ever have to add a 4th trauma to your card, then, well, you're gone. You're dead. Also, if you need to add an injury block to your 0 space, you receive a trauma. As I said, there are several types of effects that will inflict injuries and will inflict traumas. Injuries can be recovered from, you can heal from those, you can remove them from the track. The rulebook says that traumas are permanent, except that they aren't, because there are game effects that allow you to recover from traumas, but it is definitely much harder to recover from a trauma than from injuries. The game is played on 3 boards. One represents the camp, one represents the area around the camp, and one represents the island that the players are going to explore during the game. Let's start from the camp. The camp has slots where cards representing actions are placed. There are 5 basic cards that are placed there at the beginning of each game, and there are slots because other camp actions may be added during the game. Each turn, the first player receives a white meeple, which is pretty much an extra action that the player can perform, and then the player can place the meeple on one of these cards to perform the corresponding action. You can place it here, you receive an energy point. Here, this is fishing, you can draw one of those tiles, and you know if you are able to catch fish, and that will give you food. Other actions are possible. And there are also ways later in the turn for the players to use the camp actions. The board representing the area around your camp. Well, actually this area here is going to be used before the players can perform actions. This is an event deck. At the beginning of each turn, you draw a card and you resolve 3 things. 1, the weather. The weather may not change, or it may change and get better or get worse. Depending on the icon that you find on the event card for the current turn, you move that marker to the left for worse weather or to the right for better weather. If the weather is too hot, then players lose energy. If the weather is bad, then there are negative effects that need to be suffered too, and there are icons that are explaining what those are. This area here represents pieces of equipment and useful stuff that the ocean may bring to you. I guess these are remains from the ship where you used to travel from, and you may be able to benefit from them if those remains are brought to you by the tide. When you're resolving your event card after the weather section, you look at this number here and you compare it with the number of black cubes on that track. If the number of black cubes there is equal to or higher than this number, and if this space is empty, you transfer a cube from here to here. There will be later an action that will allow players to benefit from these remains. So this phase tells you whether or not things come to the shore, and then players can choose to pick them up from the shore. Last but not least, each card has an event which you simply perform by reading the text and implementing the instructions in the text. After the event for the turn has been resolved, the players place their action markers on the board on spaces such as this one to reserve the actions that they will perform during the game. When you select a certain action, you place your marker on the leftmost space on that track corresponding to that action. And that indicates the cost in energy points that you spend for performing that action. For example, that action there costs -1, -1, -1 energy. If you place a marker there and you're the first player to place your marker there, the cost for that action, which is forage, is 2 action points. The second player would have to spend only energy points. The second player would have to spend only 1 energy point. So you reserve your actions and spend the energy cost, and then the actions are performed. When you perform the forage action, you draw a tile from that box and you see how much food you've been able to find. This is collecting wood. Well, there are wood markers in the game, which are very important, and when you perform the wood action, you simply take one and place it in an area of the board that represents the storage area for the players. This is writing in your diary. This is the thing in the game that I like the least. There are conditions in the game in which all players may lose the game, but yet this is a semi-cooperative game. So unless all players lose, there will be only one player that will win. And the player will be the player that collects most story points. As you can see, it is for free. There's no energy to be spent for that. Writing in your diary simply gives you a token that says you have a story point. Hooray! There are also other effects in the game that will give you story points. Theoretically, if all players in the game survive the adventure, so if they don't all lose, the winner is the one who collected most story points. I don't like this at all. I simply ignore it and I play the game as a completely cooperative game. Naturally, there are game effects that consume story points, and then that may make sense. You can still use it. You can use the option of using or collecting story points to spend them later as another type of currency. But I don't really see the point of using them to determine a winner, because well, I guess I don't like that all that much. If you spend 2 points and you place your action marker there, when you're resolving the action, then you can draw cards from this deck, and these cards represent objects that the tide brought to the shore, and they have different values, they have different effects. And when you draw the cards, you draw 5. You show them to the players, each player receives 1, then the ones that haven't been chosen are discarded, and you remove the cube from that area. Fire! You need to light the fire because you can get cold on deserted islands at night. The amount of energy that you use to light the fire is variable. You choose how much energy you want to spend, then you roll a die, and if you rolled equal to or less than the amount of energy that you spent, you have been able to light a fire. Well, and to light a fire, you also need to have wood in your storage, and you need to burn that. When the fire is lit, you look at this section of the board here. There's a token here representing the fire. You flip that token to indicate that the fire now is on. Each turn you need to feed a piece of wood to the campfire to make sure that it keeps burning. Otherwise, you flip that marker back to what it was before, and again, you cannot enjoy the benefits of fire. Building, you can build stuff. This stack of tiles represents shelters that you can build. To build this shelter here, and the shelters are in order, you have to build them in order. To build this shelter, you spend 3 energy points and 2 woods. Then you flip this tile to this side and you place it here on the shore, on this area here, representing the area where the players will rest. One of the actions that you can do is to rest. You place your marker on one of these boxes. If you rest, usually you would only take, you only recover a point of energy, but if you have shelter, you may get more points. Then you roll a die, you look at the table. With a level 1 shelter, you still recover only 1 point of energy. If you roll 1, 2, or 3, and 4, 5, or 6, you recover 2 points of energy. Also, you recover from an injury when you take the rest action. And later forms of shelters get increasingly better. As you can see, they allow you to recover more energy points and to recover from more injuries. There is an empty box here for things that may become available to build during the game. And then there are 2 long-term constructions that you will probably, well, take several turns to build. And in that case, you simply need to put together a lot of resources to build those things. You simply pile up the resources that you're building, that you are accumulating. And when you have enough resources to build the thing, then you can build the thing. This requires 8 energy and 8 woods, and it allows you to build a large bonfire, which may help you be seen when a ship will come by the island. The ultimate goal is to get off the island. So you need, during the game, not just to survive, but to put together resources that will allow you to be picked up by the passing ship. And another thing that you can build over time is by spending 12 energies is the big help sign. Here you have the area where you store your food and your wood. And also there are perishable foods that you can add here, but those need to be consumed immediately the turn that you gather them. Other types of food are non-perishable and you can leave them there for longer. Very important, the explore action. You place your action marker there, you spend the energy, and then, well, after the other actions have been performed, it is time to start exploring the island. When you explore, you play a sequence of exploration rounds. In each exploration round, you can choose to explore more, in which case you draw a card corresponding to the color of the area in which you are, yellow, green, and red. Or you can choose to try to go back to camp, but you may get lost. If you're trying to go back to camp, you roll 2 dice and you need to roll equal to or higher than the number indicated on this track in the space where that marker is. And yes, that marker may move during the exploration, so that going back home will get increasingly harder. When you choose to explore, well, you simply draw a card and you resolve the card. Some cards have simple effects, which, well, you just read the text and you resolve the effect. When you get that icon there, you move this marker here by 1 on this track. This marker here, well, this icon here, that's the same. The footprint icon makes you move on that track, and there are also things that may give you story points. So some cards you simply play, resolve. Some cards play, resolve. You may have to roll dice. But some cards may launch storylines. And these cards have a longer text, and usually they will instruct you to add more cards to the decks or to resolve cards if certain conditions are met. For example, look at this. We found a river. As long as you have it, players can fish, okay. You can discard a river in order to add more storage, okay. Add card 28 to the interior of the island and card 29 to the event deck. Cards that need to be added come from this large deck of numbered cards here. So depending on the storylines that are unraveled, different cards will be added to the decks. And these cards also may then bring other cards into the game. They really create storylines. As they are linked in micro narrations, in micro narratives. Some of them more developed, some not much developed. If you reach the new section of the exploration track, then you start drawing cards from another deck. If you're in a section of the track and all the cards for that section are over, then you automatically teleport to the next section, and you continue like this, exploration after exploration, until and deck after deck, until you reach the last space on the track. When a player reaches that space there, the ship that may save the castaways is in sight. It's approaching. That player can choose to end the game at that point or the following turn. When that is done, when the game is over at that turn or the following one, the players look at the event cards that are still in the deck at that point. Suppose these are the ones that we have. And they look at the cards, at the icons at the bottom of that deck. As you can see, there are several possible items. Some we have seen, like the big sign or the bonfire, and some other things that you may be able to retrieve during the game. In order to be picked up by the ship, you need to be able to meet the conditions of one of these cards. You need to fulfill one of these cards. For example, if we have all of these cards, then we can fulfill this. All of these things, we can fulfill that card. Well, in that case, we'll be able also to fulfill this one, but it's going to be more fun to fulfill. If you're able to fulfill the conditions of one of the remaining event cards after the end of the game has been triggered, the players don't lose the game, but they do not all collectively win, because theoretically at that point you have to determine the winner by counting story points. If you play it with me, we will all win the game. I only play this game in fully cooperative form or in solitaire form. But going to the top of the island may not be that easy. Another thing that may happen is that you get lost. You decide not to continue with your exploration anymore. You roll for returning to camp and you don't roll well enough. Then you are lost in the jungle. You can't go back to camp. That means the next turn, when players are placing direction markers on this board here, you won't do that. After they're done, you will spend one of your action markers to move a marker which indicates the number that you need to roll or higher, to move that to the left. Then you roll again, and if you manage to go back to camp by rolling equal to or higher than, then you still have one of your two action markers that you can place on the action board. Otherwise, you have to spend your second action marker for the turn to try to go back again. After all the actions for the turn have been resolved, you will have a survival phase in which players need to eat. During the feeding phase, you distribute the food that is in the stores to the players, and the players can choose to feed the food that they receive to their characters, to give it to other player, to return it to the storage. Important is that each character that eats a food will recover a point of energy, and if a character doesn't eat any food for the entire turn, the character loses 1 energy and also gains 2 injuries. After that, players need to rest. Simply put, you check to see whether the campfire is lit or not. It also needs to have a wood on it. You need to feed a piece of wood every day or every turn. If the campfire is lit, each player recovers 1 energy. If there is no fire burning, then each castaway loses 1 energy. Can a game be too thematic? Maybe, and maybe this is one such game. Mind you, I play games that are intensely thematic. I play war games that have more theme than this one. And yet there's something in the way in which this design captures theme that left me cold. I felt like the designer wanted to put too many aspects and facets of what it may mean to be a castaway on a deserted island, and then after thinking about a story about that, what it feels like, the challenges are, then you start mechanically translating all of these elements into mechanics, into rules, into subsystems of the design. It just feels like the design is very clunky. It feels like a machine that has too many wheels and cogs and buttons and parts to produce not that much energy, not that much work. You collect wood, you make meals, you turn on the fire, you put on something, you build a shelter, you get lost in the woods, and that has its own procedure, you distribute food, and it just feels like, especially the resource management part of the game, could it be streamlined, could it be simplified, it could be a little more elegant. As for the narrative aspect, this is the part of the game that actually I was most excited about. I was okay dealing with all of the mundane stuff of survival to be able to experience some fun, crazy exploration. And when I read the rules and I saw how the narrative was going to work, I was excited about it. I realized that the cards were sort of choose your adventure engine. The cards will link to one another, would form narratives. There are choices that have to be made in certain cards. Fun stuff, I thought. Actually, I liked the fact that the cards would create narratives in unpredictable sequences because, well, now I found, say, the map of a treasure, then a card is added to another deck. Who knows if that's the treasure or not? I shuffle in the other deck, I shuffle that in the other deck, and then maybe an hour later, I pick up that card. The point is that with the idea of shuffling, I like the idea of unpredictability before I played the game. As I played the game, I realized that unfortunately that creates a very deep sense of fragmentation in the stories, especially because you have some of these stories going on at the same time. You find a mysterious element that may have some consequences. I'm trying not to spoil stories for you. Those consequences will be discovered later, as you're also following a lot of other stories. All of a sudden, say, chapter 2 of one of the stories pops up, and then another element is added, then that element will be neglected for a while as other things in the story happen. It is hard with so many samples going on at the same time, with so much fragmentation, to really get excited about any of these, to really have the sense of a progressing narrative, to really have the sense of a story that reaches an acme and just is fun to enjoy in a strictly narrative sense. So that part too, at least for me, fell a little flat. And when you have these two elements, the narrative, which didn't feel that exciting, and then the, let's just call it Euro part, Eurogamey part, the resource management part, which just feels clunky, feels too heavy for what it produces. Then you have two elements that really do not work well by themselves and do not go all that well together. The game felt long. I must say that it also is long. This is just long per se. But I feel that some games that I play are much longer than this one. It just this one felt long. I felt that it dragged a little bit, precisely because it was hard to get excited about any long-term element of the game. Yes, there are things that you need to build turn after turn, but when the stories are not that interesting in a in terms of continuity, and when you always have to do all these small tasks, it was hard to get excited and to see a narrative emerge. And a narrative that emerges from a long game is what makes the difference from a game that feels short and one that feels long. This one just felt as a continuous sequence of small things that you're doing, and without these things really coalescing to an experience that could be more than the sum of the parts. Yes, I think this is probably the problem. This game is just the sum of its parts. And for a game that takes quite a while to set up, and it's not that easy to explain, lasts a long time, I think, well, you do all of these things, you invest the time and energy for a game that after all it is just the sum of its parts, it may not be worth it. At least not for me. I feel like this game had huge potential, and that potential just remains potential and it's not really fully expressed or fulfilled. There are in Hollywood script doctors. Maybe we can have a game doctor that fixes its design. Maybe with some tweaks it can get better. Maybe it just needs to be tightened up and streamlined a little bit. As is, I feel it's a game with all the potential, but ultimately, at least for me, it resulted in a quite flawed game experience. Not a game that I see myself playing very often in the future, not one that I feel will hit the table very often, if ever.